the rules that were intended to save taxpayer money ironically cause taxpayer money to be wasted. This is kind of the point about risk. Like our tolerance for projects going sideways in the public sector is, I would argue, near zero now. And I think that hurts us because then we create a bunch of rules that are designed to save taxpayer money. But the people who know the rules and can navigate them are those who are on the inside of the castle, right? And they can price the compliance with those rules into what they're charging the government. And people who are on the outside of it, they look at like, oh, hey, maybe I should like sell to the city or to the county or to that school district because I have a good idea for how they could help. But the reality is they look at the procurement and they're like, oh, it's a total black box. And they're like, forget it. I'm just going to work on the private sector. So over time, there are fewer and fewer companies on the inside of the proverbial castle. And there's not enough backfilling of new innovative companies behind it. So I think anytime you have a situation where there's a monopoly or a duopoly, like you're just not going to get good price discovery. We can unpack that if you want, but like I think that's a fundamental thing that is a really hard problem. I could work for the rest of my life and not solve that problem.
Welcome to The Peel. I'm your host, Turner Novak, founder of Banana Capital. Today's guest is Mike Vichich, co-founder and CEO of Pursuit.
One way that we think about our job is like reducing the overhead of selling to the public sector. The best contractor should win, not just the best connected one.
Our conversation gets into how AI will impact business models.
I don't think switching costs goes away. I just think that if the only thing that was durable was that the data was locked in this database, I think that problem gets easier.
How AI will change the government.
There's like 30 million new documents produced every year.
If DOGE is actually working.
If you look at outlays from treasuries so far in 2025, they're actually higher than in years past.
How to disagree.
If you can't articulate the opposing viewpoint better than the person who believes it, you don't know enough.
Hitting rock bottom, building his first startup.
We ran out of money at the end of 15. We had $11 in our company bank account. Missed payroll for 6 months. So many people were like, dude, just shut down the company. What are you doing?
The importance of talking to customers and the pivot that saved them.
He was like, can you take that CRM idea and wrap a wait list around it?
The moment they almost killed their first customer, eventually scaling to 10 million ARR, and then selling to Olo, a public company, for 187 million.
And I thought that they might have like killed us because it didn't go well.
But before we talk to Mike, I publish episodes of The Peel every week, exploring the world's greatest startup stories, just like this one. Check the show notes to jump to timestamps of all the topics we discussed, leave a comment, explore the back catalog of almost 100 episodes, share with a friend, and subscribe wherever you're listening so you never miss an episode. Let's talk to Mike. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, man. Fun to be here.
I can't keep a straight face. We're both sitting straight up if you're not watching the video. We were just talking about not slouching over. Yeah, I think we're going to talk about a bunch of different stuff. Companies that you built, sold, you're working on now. Talk about AI, selling to the government. Always a fun topic.
But
yeah, I think first one is just, how do you think AI is changing how we're building businesses and companies? Like, I know we got lunch a couple months ago.
Yeah.
This was like half the lunch.
Yeah.
So we can kind of revisit this a little bit.
I mean, I definitely don't know the answer. One way that I think about it, there's an awesome book by a guy named Hamilton Helmer, I think is how you pronounce his name.
Yep.
It's called The 7 Powers. So like at the end of every Acquired podcast, they break down the company on those 7 powers. And I think it'd be really interesting to have kind of, what does it mean in the age of AI? Because the argument is that there are 7 things, like in Warren Buffett's world, he always talks about how differential pricing is the number one thing that's like the most sought after thing for it.
There's like pricing powers. You can just go to your customers and say, hey, we're increasing the price by X% or whatever dollars.
Yeah.
And they literally can't do anything.
Yeah.
Because they have no other.
And they're not that upset about it, right? Like, yeah, I think he has a line like, a bad business, customers get upset if you raise price 1% overnight and they really care. Good businesses, you raise it 10% and they don't care. So when you think about how do you get pricing power, that comes back to like the unique value that you're creating. And this Helmer thing, 7 Powers, I think breaks it down nicely. There's like, the way he describes it, there's one page in the book that breaks it down great. There's like 3 different stages of a company. There's kind of like startup, growth, and maturity. And the powers, there's 2 in startup, there's 3 in growth, and there's 2 in maturity. In startup, you have cornered resource and counter positioning. So cornered resources like we own all the lithium mines, or we have all the best AI researchers in the world.
Yep.
Counter positioning is the classic one that I think of is like Blockbuster, Netflix. Netflix used Blockbuster's business model to kind of beat them, right?
Yep.
Because Blockbuster didn't want to get rid of the late fee thing. That was where they got most of it.
That was literally most of the money.
So, you wonder like a little bit in today's world, like, was that Google, with AI search? But anyways, and then in the second one, growth, you have network effect, classic one there is Facebook. Scale economy is the one that I think of there is like with Amazon. If they buy an airplane to make Prime faster, they can, leverage that across their entire subscriber base for Prime. So their cost on a marginal basis for that investment is relatively lower. And then switching cost is kind of a midterm, growth stage one. And then under maturity, you have brand and you have process power. So brand, the example there is like Coca-Cola. Warren Buffett, someone asked him like, how do you build a brand like Coke's? And he said, you start building it in the 1800s and you invest in it every year since. And then Toyota is, I think, a good example of the processing power one. So like, if you think about that in an age of AI, which ones are are least durable in your mind?
Yeah, I feel like AI automates things, can make things go faster. It gives you sort of like labor horsepower or like electronic and digital horsepower is maybe a way to think about it.
Yep.
So I think we talked about one of the big ones was maybe process power. You would think is one that goes away because you can just hyper speed run doing a bunch of things.
Yeah.
But there's probably an argument to be made of if you don't have the processes set up right to utilize like in quote unquote, I think like an AI workforce, an agent workforce is how people describe it. I mean, I don't use it to its full advantage. I know probably like no one does. I'm assuming no one does yet.
Yeah. I mean, with the classic thing I think people talk about is you break the tasks down into these little micro things, right?
Yeah.
And each of those is a step in the process, basically. And you could imagine, like, they're not easy, right? Like, this is one of the things we'll talk about later, but with Pursuit, it's like, there's a lot of work in just like reading a document still. It's getting easier and easier. And maybe that goes away in 5 years. But from my perspective, I think counter positioning, I think it is easier than ever to start a company and get something off the ground.
Because you can say, do something with AI or you don't actually tell people that, but you use it and it actually makes a marginal difference.
Yeah.
Versus not being able to use it,
right.
5 years ago.
Yeah. And I think like, with Wisely, one of the things that we were counter positioning against was the kind of the stated position of a lot of companies, whether it was OpenTable or Yelp or Resi to a lesser degree, but specifically OpenTable and Yelp at the time, they were kind of owning the consumer data. And our counter positioning against that was the restaurant should own it. Like it's the restaurant's customer. But I just think that, starting a company that has that counter positioning mindset, like you could ship something pretty easy today. So I think counter positioning kind of goes down a little bit in value. I think the big one though.
Wait, goes down? So it becomes
less important.
Oh, because anyone can do it.
Yeah. Or it's easier to do.
Because it becomes more common, but the durability of it or the opportunity there actually goes down a little bit.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Okay. And then I think the other one that's like I expect to change pretty dramatically is switching cost. Because you can use AI to automate a switch. Yeah, right.
What I think. Yeah.
If we were to talk to a lot of PE investors, they would say that they want to invest in the system of record.
Right.
That's like the term that everyone uses.
Yep.
And what happens when you can now just like port all the data? You could build an agent that ports all the data from one place to another. I don't see what the bottleneck would be on that. So I think that goes down. I think network effect still is a thing. Scale economy is still a thing. Corner resource still a thing. Brand, like OpenAI came out of nowhere, within the last 10 years and built a brand that like, I think in some ways is better than Google on the AI front, actually in probably most ways from a consumer point of view.
Is that unique to AI though? Because there's always new brands kind of popping up. Like think Airbnb over the last 20 years, decimates the hotel. I guess depends who you are. Yeah. Some people actually don't like Airbnb's brand because they complain about quality. Yeah, because all the fees and
Yeah, I mean, it feels like brand is one of those ones that always ebbs and flows. Like there's always an opportunity
For like
to
a new
build. Yeah, maybe it depends. Like in AI right now, like are you going to go in and build a better version of ChatGPT? Probably not, right? Like that they have the brand there, but there might be new opportunities in different categories where like the brand has gone stale.
Yeah.
Of leader, like I feel like one that people talk a lot is Salesforce. Like you hear people all the time, like what does Salesforce even do?
Right.
And it's like a $200 billion company.
Right. Switching costs a huge barrier to them, right? Because you've got all your
The customer data.
not only all the data, which I think is probably the easier to switch thing, right? Like if you have an agent port your data out of Salesforce into something else. One thing that's really hard to switch though is you've got all your integrations to it. It integrates to literally everything. And then I think switching costs is still the thing if you have like all of your sales team and all your BDRs and everyone is using it every day. Now you got to think about ripping all those use cases out one by one and porting it. So I don't think switching cost goes away. I just think that if the only thing that was durable was that the data was locked in this database and moving the data out would have been tough. Like I think that problem gets easier.
It's probably like when you say Salesforce versus a smaller software company, Salesforce is so big, so many users. You have like network effects on the demand side. Is that what you'd consider that? But there's just so many, so that the switching cost goes up as the other effects go up. So maybe like switching cost is one where depending on the other lenses that you can tilt on this, like the more of a cornered resource you have, the harder it is to switch. The more the stronger your network effects are, the harder it is to switch. So to your point, then the durability
that's
just
not a
comes
switching
down.
cost thing. It's just that's a network effect thing.
Yeah, or maybe it becomes attached to some of the other ones because that's like always the argument. Switching costs is just so hard to switch. It takes so much time, and AI just like you can just like automate the time, speed up the manual, low skilled labor. Yes, maybe it goes away or something, or just becomes like way less of an important vector.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about, because then there's in our space at Pursuit, there are a lot of like companies that are trying to solve a similar problem. Maybe they have like a data angle, and there's various other angles. Like there's a whole reseller community too that they play a role in this. And I think that a lot of the stuff that makes the existing ecosystem of resellers and systems integrators, like that's a cornered resource in a way because they have contracts with public sector entities, and that is really hard to replicate. You can't do it overnight.
Yeah, it probably depends on the type of cornered resource. Like that cornered resource is a legal contract that's harder to get around. Maybe if the cornered resource is a source of data or a talent pool, you could argue that it is more or less powerful than the legal contracts, depending on what it is. Like the like OpenAI having, spent a bunch of money acquiring all the best AI researchers, maybe 5 years ago, 4 years ago, 3 years ago. I mean, now they're just leaving and going to Anthropic and moving companies.
Other places,
Yeah, so is it, or they're starting new companies, right? Like a bunch of the co-founders of OpenAI are now starting new businesses that are raising a ton of capital.
Yeah, and at the same time, I think that's true. And I would argue that OpenAI's velocity is improving. Like they're shipping,
that's true. Yeah,
they're shipping a lot of stuff. Yeah, maybe it's moved like out of research land into product land.
Yep.
I think a lot of stuff that you and I see every day is more in product land rather than research land. But yeah, it's interesting to see.
Yeah. And then what about economies of scale? I feel like that's one that doesn't really matter as much in the internet. Like it's more of a physical world, like anything. Yeah, like you've got some sort of fixed cost or fixed asset that you use across. Then the bigger your customer base gets, the lower the cost is per use when you just kind of aggregate it up. So maybe there's something related to like server farms and like the GPU clusters everyone builds. Those keep getting better, and the cost keeps coming down. So I just don't. I guess it just depends.
Well,
like, what
if you're building Stargate, it's easier to justify if you've got, more users, right?
Yeah.
On that end, and then just from our angle, one of the things that we are investing a lot of energy in is document processing. So there's roughly 110,000 public sector entities in the U.S., state agencies, city, municipalities, counties, K-12 districts, higher ed, and special districts. Special districts are like a port authority or a mosquito abatement district or a utility district. There's like 40 or 50,000 of them, depending on who you ask.
Really? It's like half of them.
It's crazy. Yeah.
Like
there's a ton. Bridges. Yeah, there's all kinds of stuff.
Bridges get their own district?
Yeah, like the Mackinac Bridge.
So you might have like 10 employees, 20 employees working at like the Mackinac Bridge District Authority?
Yeah. Yeah, Mackinac Bridge Authority, I think. Don't quote me on that, but that is a good example of one.
Interesting.
So, they all produce documents. And if you just kind of look at it, they produce budgets, they produce transcripts, they have contracts that are public record, strategic plans. There's all these different plans that they produce that are public record. And so, by our count, there's like 30 million new documents produced every year by all these different public sector entities. And like processing them is painfully difficult. Like before AI, like it just didn't really happen in a comprehensive way. People they would have humans or lobbyists read them, for a given place. Like New York City makes sense to have people go read all their stuff, right? But someplace in northern Michigan, probably not, right? But now we're able to read that. And I think the thing that's interesting about it is if we invest the energy into reading those documents, there's a bunch of people who want them, right?
Yep.
So I do think that is there's still examples of that in the digital world, scale economy.
So then what do you think becomes important? Like if you're building a business in 2025?
Yeah.
Oh, wow, we're almost halfway through 2025. I was just thinking about that in my head. I was like, what am I saying right now? We're almost halfway through. So
closer to 2050 than 2000, which is wild to think about.
Oh, yeah. That is crazy.
Yeah.
There's always those stats like Cleopatra lived closer to today than she did to the building of the Great Pyramids. Have you heard that one?
No, that's not.
Yeah, that's not. You just think of her as like pyramids. You think of Egypt. Yeah. Yeah. So I guess it's an interesting question of what actually becomes important. Like what should you focus on?
Yeah.
If you're we're probably mostly startups listening to this, but if you're just like a business, like future-proofing yourself, quote unquote, you want to be around in 10 years. What are the most important things?
Oh man, if you figure that out, you got to tell me. I think there's some thoughts that I have on that. So first of all, one of our investors is Jack Altman, and he did this program last summer that brought a bunch of AI startups together. It was called Generate, and he set up a bunch of meetings with folks, and one of them was with Sam. And they talked about like, where do you think companies are going, and OpenAI has come out and said this publicly, but basically like end of 22, they shipped chat. And then you have reasoners, there's like 3 or 4, I think now they have 5 levels of different AI. But the punchline is that by 2030, there's like the whole company AI where one person should be able to build $1 billion company because an AI can handle marketing and product and engineering and sales and customer success and all the things, right? So if that's true, no idea what matters. But I think for us right now, the thing that we are kind of relentlessly committed to, one is our problem thesis at Pursuit. And the way that we describe that is that the rules that were intended to save taxpayer money ironically cause taxpayer money to be wasted. Like we can unpack that if you want, but like I think that's a fundamental thing that is a really hard problem. I could work for the rest of my life and not solve that problem. So that's one, is we're committed to solving that or, materially improving it.
I don't know if that's possible to solve completely.
We'll try.
It's a hard one.
You got to try, right?
Yeah,
that's
it's a
like
big
step
problem.
one of solving it is you got to try.
Well, it's like
for a really long time.
Yeah, it's like the OpenAI of like achieving AGI. It's like that's like an undefined objective. Like, did you ever actually get?
Sasha defined it, by the way. Did you see that?
Wasn't it like making a profit or something? Like it was
like $100 billion of profit in aggregate.
That's AGI.
Yeah. Or I think they also said something like world GDP grows by 10% a year.
Oh yeah. Okay.
So, anyways,
again, like that's a pretty abstract. I don't know if
right?
Yeah.
At
this scale, and you add another 10 trillion in GDP.
Well, you've seen the gone to Our World in Data, and it has GDP on a graph. This is an amazing graph, by the way. Our World in Data.
Yeah, it's one of those charts that shows like each year, like each century or whatever of like a certain thing, and it's like it moves and stuff.
Yeah, like humans have been around for 200,000 years. Yeah, and it shows GDP
of humanity
flatlined, right?
Yeah,
and then it rips, and we're like in the going vertical.
Yeah, and we're like in the you're just about to raise a Series A.
Yeah,
Like, we're just getting started here. We're so early.
Yeah. I don't even know how we got there. What was the question?
We were talking about how AGI, achieving AGI, we're talking about
How
objective
pursue
goals.
Yes, there. Yeah.
Thesis, yeah.
Okay, so we're committed to the problem thesis, number one, and trying to solve that. And then I think the second part is just listening to our customers and, thinking critically about the problems that they're facing on a day-to-day basis and how we can solve them. And our hope, our bet is that, if we're doing those things, if we're defining the problem better and we're listening to our customers better and shipping the things that really matter to them, no matter what happens on the AI front, we'll be well positioned for it. Do you think that's a fair bet?
I mean, it's a pretty crazy ambitious. Like it's a fair for sure.
Yeah.
Like it's a fair bet. It's better than like, we're going to help you automate sending cold email spam to people.
Well,
no offense to anyone doing that. Maybe do it towards improving government efficiency. Yeah, there you go, something like that. Yeah. So I guess then the other question is like, how do you do that? Like, how does AI interface with the government?
Yeah.
And maybe, I guess I have a guess at this, but I know you've told me before, but how does this play out?
I mean, I also don't know. I think the place that we are, like, so first of all, I came from the perspective of like someone who cared a lot about our country. My parents were teachers. My family, my grandfather flew bombers in World War II, uncle fighter pilot, FBI, other cousin cop. Like a lot of people in my family were involved with public service. And just like growing up, it was something that I cared about. I always cared about our country and tried to, think about how do you leave the world a better place in that regard. So that was always kind of there in the back of my mind. I think, the other part of it is like, what incentives exist? I'm a huge Charlie Munger fan, and he has this quote, show me the incentive, I'll show you the outcome.
Yeah.
And so coming from a place of not working in the public sector and having like kind of a just, layman's view of it, I think is actually, my hope is that that's actually helpful rather than a liability, right? And I'm sure in some ways it's a liability because I don't know what I don't know yet, but the way we've tried to approach it is just to understand both sides of it. There's another amazing Charlie Munger quote where he says, if you can't articulate the opposing viewpoint better than the person who believes it, you don't know enough. Like you haven't done the work required to have an opinion.
But you need to know both sides of the thesis so well that you then come to the answer.
Yeah.
Like, I know all of it.
The central thesis, the thing that kind of, pierces all the noise. And so I think we're working toward that. I think that's something that you got to have empathy for people, because I think a lot of times people who work in the public sector get a bad rap, especially today. They're like, they're lazy, they work from home, they never work, or they're not, good enough to make it in the private sector. And I think that's all bullshit, frankly. Like that's not real. And I think a lot of people working in the public sector have done more for the country on a given Tuesday than most other people. So again, they work within a system that has incentives, and one of those is not, let's just be real, it's not seeking the optimal price, it's reducing risk. That's what government incentives are all about. So if you try to unpack that, even in the private sector, people choose to work with companies that they know and that they trust. That's true in the public sector too. So I think, we're trying to empathize with why do people make the decisions that they make, and assume, I think this is key, we're assuming that we're not going to change those incentives. Like those incentives are going to be there. How do we work within them? And that's kind of how we got to the founding of Pursuit, was we kind of grappled with that stuff.
So when you talk about the incentives and the incentives specifically to not take risk, I'm like, what does that mean? Because I guess, if I'm not familiar with how some of these entities work and how they make decisions, like you just think like, they should just do what's best for the community or for people. Like, why is that such a big deal that they don't take risk?
Well, I think back to the problem thesis, the rules that were intended to save taxpayer money cause taxpayer money to be wasted. I think that is a fact.
Like, how is that a thing?
Well,
how does that work?
So let's talk through it, right? Like, let's say that, you and I both live in Ann Arbor, and let's say the mayor of Ann Arbor, who's an awesome dude, by the way, he would never do this. Maybe we should make up a fictional city.
We'll call it Carter.
Whoville. Yeah. A mayor of Whoville. if he's like awarding contracts to his friend or brother who didn't deserve it, we'd probably be pretty pissed off about that, right? We'd be like, what? Like, how about this should be an open bid? It should be on the internet for 60 days. We should get 3 bidders. You know, we should pick the low bid, right? These are all, they sound like logical, good things to do.
That seems like, okay, the government will probably get the best product for the lowest price.
Exactly.
Save money.
And so that's, the road to hell paved with good intentions. I think those intentions are right. And by the way, they oftentimes come from a time where someone got burned. Same with insurance requirements. Someone goes out of business because they didn't have enough insurance. So the city or the county sunk a bunch of money into a project with a company that failed. Oh my goodness. Like now the taxpayers lost a bunch of money. And so now forevermore, you have higher insurance requirements in order to do a project. Another good one is the procurement rules, right? There's these things called procurement thresholds where, people who work in government can put something on a P card or purchasing card below whatever, $500 sometimes, or $1,000. And then above that, they have to go get an informal bid. And above that, they got to do a formal bid process.
So this is probably to prevent a government worker from like charging up a bill for something that might be too high of an amount.
And then now that, whenever that has happened in the past, it's a big to do. In the old days, the newspaper covered it. Now it's all over the internet, and people are lighting up the elected officials and the managers of that, whatever the entity is. And they're like, how are you allowing this to happen with taxpayer money?
Yep.
We create rules now where every trip more than 90 miles has to be approved by the city manager. And like, does the city manager have better things to do than that? Absolutely they do. So I think this is kind of the point about risk. Like our tolerance for projects going sideways in the public sector is, I would argue, near zero now. And I think that hurts us because then we create a bunch of rules that are designed to save taxpayer money. But the people who know the rules and can navigate them are those who are on the inside of the castle, right? And they can price the compliance with those rules into what they're charging the government. And people who are on the outside of it, they look at like, oh, hey, maybe I should like sell to the city or to the county or to that school district because I have a good idea for how they could help. But the reality is they look at the procurement and they're like, oh, it's a total black box. I don't know where I'm going to get the money for that because I have to, it's probably I'm going to not win this deal for maybe 2 or 3 years because I have to get licensed and registered. And do I need a lobbyist? And I got to hire a lawyer. And I need to, there's like all this, the way the proposal has to be structured so that I don't get disqualified on some technicality. All of that stuff is what goes through people's heads. And they're like, forget it. I'm just going to work on the private sector. So over time, there are fewer and fewer companies on the inside of the proverbial castle. And no, there's not enough backfilling of new innovative companies behind it. And so you have people who are left there. And by the way, on the inside of the castle, there's business owners who are retiring or selling their companies. There's roll-ups, private equity roll-ups going on inside there. So even the number of suppliers inside the castle walls, that's becoming fewer and fewer. And there's no backfilling. So I think anytime you have a situation where there's a monopoly or a duopoly, like you're just not going to get good price discovery. You're not going to get good pricing.
Yeah,
quality is going to go down.
Yeah, it seems like there's a less and less competition, and that leads to higher prices. I mean, that's the classic way to lower prices is you're operating a business, you're selling coffee, you're selling it for $20 because you're the only option in town. And I come in and say, I'm going to charge 16 for this. And you're like, oh shit, I got to charge 14 now. And your margins were 95% before selling them at 20. We compete all the way down to 50% margins. We sell them for $2. And where maybe you sell yours for 3 and I sell mine for 2 because you're like the original, you're a premium product. But you'll have 66% margins. Right. And now instead of customers having to pay $20 for a cup of coffee, they pay 3 to you and 2 for me if they want my crappier, lower cost version. But yeah, overall you get a 90%, 85% decrease in price.
Totally.
Extreme example. Hopefully no one's charging $20 for coffee. But
related to that, back to the point about risk. If there's in local government, there's an incentive to go with people right? Because I trust you, rather, let's say it's not coffee, but it's like road resurfacing.
Oh, yeah.
Or water main replacement, right? Like if that goes south and you mess up the water for your city, like people are going to lose their jobs for that. Elected officials are not going to get voted back in. So, then let's put ourselves in the chairs of people who work in the public sector. You're like, we work for the water department. We're trying to pick the contractor to do water main replacement. Do they have a proven track record? Have we worked with them before? If the price is 10% higher, 20% higher, we're probably okay with that, because we also know, by the way, that people will lowball. They'll intentionally lowball so they get a bid, and then they'll change order it, right? So you might come in at $100 to do this project. Someone else comes in at $125. You think the person who does $125 is going to give you a better outcome, but your procurement rules say you got to go with the lowest bidder, and now you go with the person who does it for $100. But then they change order you up to $150, and you're like, wait a minute, like. And granted, there's no guarantee that the person who quoted $125 was going to also not change order. But this is the point, right? Like it's really difficult to actually parse through it. And I talked with one well-known infrastructure contractor, and that person told me, unless you get 5 bidders, you're not really going to have true price discovery.
So what is a change order? That might be an obvious question for somebody who's never heard that word before.
Well, it's just like I quote you to redo your roof. Or I quote you to redo your roof, right? And so I come over, my crew, and we'll say we do it for $100.
Yep.
My crew rips the shingles off and the tar paper under it, and we're like, oh, Turner, bad news, man.
Wood's rotten.
Exactly.
Wood's rotten.
We didn't quote that in. So now, it's not 100, it's 200. And you're like, oh, great. It would be nice.
I probably would have had to pay that to anybody, in theory, not just you, but anyone who redid the roof.
Yeah, and then, but also because the wood's rotten, the water got down into here, and we got to, replace all the insulation, and it's, there's even mold growing, and now we got to do mold remediation, and you're like, wait, do we have to do all of this? Like, how bad is it actually? But you're so far down the path.
Because you don't have a roof. They ripped your roof off.
Yeah, and you got to get it done, right? So these things happen, but then it's not to say that you didn't need to have the wood replaced because it was rotten. But like, what's the price of that wood replacement? That is something that's probably not competed because you've already signed this deal, right? So the margins on those change orders, what are they actually? We don't know. So it's tough, man. Like I really do have a lot of empathy for folks in the public sector making these decisions. And I think that that's why I come back to, like, we as a private sector company, Pursuit, we're not going to change the incentives. Those are granted. They're taking them for granted. And, we'll talk about DOGE, but like maybe there will be public sector incentives that change. Because I do think that when you think about like the risk aversion, there are things in procurement rules that are risk averse, but then there's also cultural stuff around it. And I don't think that the rules are really hard to change because you gotta like change code in order to do that. The culture around it, I think the culture could be changed under the right leadership framework. I'm not saying that that's where we are today, but I think that could evolve.
So one interesting thing you just mentioned, DOGE. I know you told me that, so there's all this public perception about DOGE. We're going and cutting costs. How's that going?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I guess my fundamental take on this is, when you live in a country where there's trillions and trillions in deficits a year, and interest on that debt is now, there's more spent on interest on the debt than there is defense. Like, and if you look at the graph on interest expense, it's going vertical. Yeah. I would argue that's not a good place, right? Like if that was my house, my family had that financial picture, I'd be really concerned. And so I think the same thing is true for the country. We have to do something about it. So fully on board with the idea, and that's why we started Pursuit, was to try to work on this fundamental problem. Because, by the way, a lot of the federal money goes to the states. But, like I definitely think action is required. I don't think that there are incentives generally at the public sector to have the budget reduced or to have the deficit reduced, because who wants to go to their constituents, no matter what side of the aisle you're on, who wants to go to their constituents and say, hey, we're actually not going to be investing in whatever the thing is that's in our district?
Because it's always like a a healthcare project
Yeah.
or like an infrastructure. We're doing this thing. We're spending this money to like improve quality of life in some way.
Yeah. Who wants to go to it is not a politically viable thing, especially when the other side is saying we have to do it, to say like we got to cut spending. So it's really, really tough. Back to the incentives. So I definitely think something needs to happen. I think when you look at the stuff on Twitter/X of like the talk around deficit reduction, I wonder whether it's mostly theater. And the reason why I wonder that is if you look at outlays from treasuries so far in 2025, they're actually higher than in years past. And if you look at the budget proposal, there's like no meaningful change. There was a budget that came out recently that I think was a point, don't quote me on this, but like less than a 1% reduction in spend. And there were big shifts from like non-discretionary, non-military to the military. There was a big shift there. So there was I think more than $100 billion cut from the budget from discretionary non-military and moved into military. But overall, the budget was flat. So it's kind of hard to parse talk from action. That's one of the things that I find to be challenging about this, because you hear, I think in February, there was a thing that was put out by the Department of Defense that said they were going to try to cut the defense budget by 8% a year for the next 5 years, which like, that's an interesting idea, I think, because, the U.S. spends more than 2x what the next biggest country does in defense. And I think we should have, the strongest military. I think that serves our country well. But I think there's a lot of cases where we're fighting the last war or the war before that. And maybe that's an area, like, because we're investing in those areas, manned fighters, for instance, like maybe that makes it harder for us to invest in new tech. And there's kind of the proverbial thing floating around Washington of like, if there ever was a conflict with China, or, I guess it could be any other foreign adversary, like the carriers could be sunk in 10 minutes. Just kind of like the proverbial thing people talk about from a drone or from a hypersonic missile. And so now all the investment that went into that, bottom of the ocean in 10 minutes. You're like, so anyways, like I think it's a really hard problem to solve, but I think there needs to be work done on it. But I don't think like the kind of tenor around it is actually like a sustainable thing. I think it's making a lot of people hate the idea of cutting the government budget, which I don't think is like creating the right tone for the country long term. So we'll see.
Yeah, I think what you hear the narrative come up about this is like, if you were spending all this money and you were benefiting from it, you'd make a big deal if people were trying to take that away.
Right. Yeah, for sure. And so that's, again, incentives. Show me the incentive, I'll show you the outcome.
Yeah.
I just think that this is why it takes actual real leadership. And I think no matter who was doing it, you're going to get insane pushback. So like, I just kind of take that for granted if you're going to work on the problem.
So then how did you kind of come across all of this? Because, I mean, you kind of talked about Wisely. You worked in the restaurant space.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is like a 180 or if this is like a 270 or like a 90-degree change, but it's pretty big change. How did you kind of come across all this? Like,
totally. So I left Olo, the company that bought Wisely, in February of 23. Is that right? Yeah, February of 23, when my wife and I had our third son, and took some time off, and honestly, like, didn't think about that much. Then started, I guess that was a few months, and then started reading, and I wrote down, like, for me, I talked to a bunch of second-time founders who had started, multiple companies to try to figure out, like, is there any, wisdom that I could learn from that.
What, quick pause to the story. What was the biggest wisdom?
There were a few. So there was like 3 things that I did that I think were really healthy. One was I wrote my eulogy, which is a a Charlie Munger thing. Like, write your eulogy, and that'll help you identify what's actually most important.
This is what people will say about you when you die?
Yeah, what you hope would be said about you. And so that was interesting. And I think there was one kind of new thing there, or I guess one change in emphasis there, where it was obviously my family was my number one thing. Like, if no matter what business success I had if my family was not in a good spot in all the ways, like, then I would be upset about that. So like that helps me prioritize. And then also like focusing locally was really important. And that's probably like a shift that I've had, rather than thinking like on kind of like a global scale, like, no, how can I like literally make my street better?
Yeah, that's true. I think a lot of people underestimate and they overestimate how much of an impact they can have on the world, and they underestimate the impact they can have on a smaller scale, like the smaller you get, right? Like if we just think of, there's 3 people in this room right now, I could probably relatively easily convince both of you. We got a producer, we've got guest, the podcast host. We could all probably change our views on something.
Yeah.
Versus if we were to go, all 3 of us, we're like, let's change the world.
Yeah.
It's like,
it's a little hard.
Pretty hard. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And also like, what's the metric and all that? Yeah.
Yeah. True.
So eulogy was one thing. And then my wife and I, we wrote down our values, and then we talked about how we wanted to live those every day, every month, and every year with our kids, and teach them like being intentional about it. Right. Not to say that our values were right, but just to teach that like you discover them over the course of your life. You discover what your values are.
Yep.
And you try to live them. And the decisions that you make every day should, they should indicate what your values are, basically. Mm-hmm. Not just the thing you write down, but like the stuff
you actually do them.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the third thing, I don't have a better way to describe it. I call it the 3-column thing. There was a founder I talked to.
3 columns.
It's a genius framework.
It's a great blog post title.
The 3-column
thing.
Yeah. So I got this from another founder. And he was like, I wrote down all the stuff that I did at my prior company that I want to do again, all the stuff that I did at my prior company that I never want to do again, and then stuff that I didn't do that I want to try. Just like, a phrase, a couple words.
The 3-column thing.
3-column thing.
Yeah.
And so those 3 like things were kind of my compass. And then I just had like, that's the structured side of how I approached it. The unstructured side was like, just go have conversations that I thought might lead to an interesting place. So And over the course of the summer of 23, my now co-founder, Brandon, he and I started kicking around a bunch of ideas. And, we had an ed tech idea. And then we had an AI traffic light idea, that would use computer vision to read the throughput of an intersection and dynamically change the light. Who loves sitting at a red light when there's no one else coming, right? Like,
yeah.
No one.
Who I feel like that's like such a common startup idea, is like sitting at a red light and be like, man, there's no one around. Like, I should just be able to go. Like, how can we change this?
But totally. But like, how many common, obvious startup ideas are there? Like laying around on the ground all around you. You just gotta like,
yeah, that's true.
Find the stuff that is, that you personally care about. But anyways, in each of those cases, the ed tech and the AI traffic light thing, ed tech we would be selling to school districts, and AI traffic light we're selling to cities, counties, state agencies, and there's all the normal hard of building each of those companies, but there's the extra hard of selling to the public sector in each of them. And Brandon and I were like, maybe there's something to that, maybe now every company that wants to sell to the public sector, they have to go through all this stuff, right? And it takes years. They have to build relationships, and they have to do it place by place. And so like, if you think of that from the perspective of any investor, you're like, your sales cycle is insanely long, your CAC is insanely high, and your CAC payback is probably 4 years. That's like an uninvestable business, basically.
Yeah.
Which again, like that, I don't think that serves our country. So what Brandon and I thought was, well, what if you, rather than every individual company out there in the world having to build that stuff, what if we tried to AIify that, right? And reduce that overhead as much as humanly possible. And so that's one way that we think about our job, is like reducing the overhead of selling to the public sector, so that it would be great if it's not different from selling to the private sector, right? You could imagine how all the registrations are just done. All the hard work of finding which opportunities matter, that's all done. The legal stuff automated away, right? So we're focused on a small sliver of the overall puzzle right now around like demand gen and finding opportunities. I think selling revenue is a good thing. Like, companies are always wanting to grow, so that's partially why we chose that. But yeah, like being able to just reduce the barrier of selling to the public sector. I think that as a capitalist, as someone who believes in competition, I think that is probably the best thing that we could do given the incentives that are out there.
Just coming back to what you talked about earlier, it's helping there be more competition when a government entity is making a decision to work with a vendor, having there essentially be more options for them to choose from.
Yeah.
Which is probably better for the taxpayer community, governments, but also better for your customers because they get a seat at the table. So you're basically giving them a seat. You're trying to take them behind the castle wall, trying to add more competition, which will, in theory, should drive down the prices.
Yeah. And I think the way that we talk about it and think about it is that the best contractor should win, not just the best connected one. Like if you said it simply, I think that's where we want to be. So yeah, I think it's totally doable. Like I think with the tech that exists today, I think it's doable.
So one interesting thing that you told me once was the city that we live in, Ann Arbor. You told me an interesting stat about the budget.
Yeah.
What's going on with the Ann Arbor budget?
Yeah. This like really surprised me. So Ann Arbor, I think historically has had kind of like a good portion of the public are NIMBYs, not in my backyard. Kind of like, let's keep Ann Arbor the way it is. It's a cute, small town. We don't want to have huge, buildings going up that are blocking the sun. And like, there's a lot of that stuff, right? And if you look at over the last maybe 10 years or 5 years even, this city seems to have shifted into more of no, we need to build. And now if you look at city council and the mayor, like they're almost, I think everyone is pro development. And so I was really curious about that, like what shifted. And so in a conversation that I had with one of the elected leaders, they shared that for Ann Arbor and for actually many cities in the country, revenue will grow at low single digits, call it 1 or 2% a year.
Mm-hmm.
Costs might grow at 8 or 10% a year. And think about that from like if you're running, like you're now in a earnings call for a public company, like, yep, revenue grew at 2% and cost grew at 10. People would be like, what's going on? That doesn't seem sustainable.
Yeah.
And so I applaud the leadership in Ann Arbor for realizing that you get more leverage out of density, right? You don't need more roads. You don't need more water mains. You don't need that many more cops or fire employees to be able to serve a 20-story building than you do a 5-story building.
Plus, you just think about what's the value of a piece of grass or like a parking lot versus 20 stories.
Yeah.
You're basically taxing the economic value of that real estate that's within the jurisdiction of the city. So in theory, maybe I'm like a NIMBY at heart, but like in theory, you'd want 100-story maximum, throughput coming through every single building so you can tax it. But obviously people probably don't want that extent of it. But you could try to find a medium, a happy medium of like, it's something, some kind of a little more economic value coming through this.
Yeah, and it doesn't happen overnight either, right?
Yeah.
Like it's funny because I think a lot of people, they're like, we want to have affordable housing. And if you look at the cities in the country that have the most affordable housing, or especially change in rates of housing.
Yep.
Who is it? Houston?
I think it's Austin, yeah, because they're just building way more inventory.
Ton, right?
The prices are going down or flat, yeah.
Go figure. So that whole insight that like all other things equal, public sector revenue will grow at 1 or 2% and costs grow at 8 or 10. That's like a watershed moment for me. We looked into that. We're like, well, why are costs going up so much? And that's that's kind of how we started to have conversations around contracting being a root problem.
So that's what it is. They're just spending a little bit more on like each year they renew certain contracts and they're up 10% or 20% and what like that's it.
I wouldn't say that's it. I think that is a big part of it. Contracting is a big part of it. Another big part of it is of course labor. And
you're just giving people increases. You're maybe hiring
cost of living adjustments. Yeah. And I think there's I forget how you pronounce it. It's Baumol's cost disease or something where like basically if you have a public sector employee who's paid $100 to do whatever job, but their private sector, equivalent is paid $150 to do it, then you're going to have inflation of that price, right? Like
the public sector will inflate to the private sector.
Or it'll chase it, right? So, so I think that like, and then you look at how how a lot of public entities spend their money. There's a lot of police, there's a lot of fire, there's teacher salaries. And as, inflation is going, or as new contracts get struck with those people, that there's like a cost of living adjustment that gets built in. And that cost of living adjustment is like contractually obligated at whatever the percentage increase is a year. But the growth in revenue is not, right?
I mean, it's just purely income or property taxes, right?
Yeah,
for the most part.
So if the economy takes a hit, you have like a contractually obligated price increase, and maybe your property tax or your sales tax goes down.
And one of the issues, like there's a lot of cities that are actually shrinking, so people are moving away, and that's also going to cause revenue to go down.
Totally. And same with schools, by the way. I don't know, like if you look at Ann Arbor public schools,
attendance,
enrollment down materially, and
you have fixed costs of like all these buildings. You got the staff to
and the buildings are aging. Fortunately, in Ann Arbor, they passed $1 billion bond to be able to like renew the buildings.
Yeah, we're benefiting from that. The elementary school my kids go to and will go to.
Oh yeah,
we're getting a new one.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah,
and I'm all for it, but not like the one down the street. Definitely don't spend it there. I'm just kidding. Yeah, I think it's great.
Yeah. So, but like in a lot of places, that deferred maintenance is just accelerating. So like the budgets are getting harder and harder. So it's a tough problem, man. But one that I'm excited. I just turned 40. I'm excited to grind on this. I don't like retirement. I don't really think I'll do.
Yeah.
But I'd love to grind on this for like the next 3 decades.
Yeah. I'm going to cut that part from the episode so my wife doesn't hear this talk about working until not retiring. No.
What did you see? Did you see the thing? There was like, they were talking about how Warren Buffett retired at 95.
95, yeah.
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 Like,
is he actually retired though? He's probably still involved.
He's on the board.
He's probably just going to like he's absolving responsibility of the day-to-day management.
Yeah.
But it's still probably.
But the joke was like, in this economy, even Warren Buffett has to work till he's 95.
Saw that. So then, like of all choices, Ann Arbor. Like it's usually not on people's first list. It's like, hey, I'm going to start a tech company and like we're gonna build a unicorn, we're gonna change world, like that's more of like San Francisco speak. Maybe you'll be in New York, maybe Chicago if you want to stay in the Midwest.
Yeah,
but Ann Arbor, that's like got to be not in the top 10 of most people's list. I don't know, obviously we're both here.
The top one of my list.
Yeah, we both live here obviously, so it's the top for both of us.
Yeah.
Why Ann Arbor?
I mean, I think there's a lot that goes into that answer. I think there's, from a personal perspective, I have 3 young kids, 10, 6, and 2. The community's phenomenal. I think that the schools are amazing. It's pretty decent culturally, considering it's a small town, 125,000, depending on how
Is it 125? No.
It depends how you count students, but at Michigan, but yeah.
Fair.
But yeah, like I think from that perspective, from a family life point of view, it's phenomenal. And it's, I don't know if you believe the like greatest places to raise a family list, but it's always
it's always up there. Yeah,
always up there.
We have great PR. The Ann Arbor PR team. I'm glad we're spending money on that.
Yeah.
Keep boosting that up 10% a year.
Yeah, totally. And so I think, or maybe 20.
just 100%.
Yeah,
just
right.
focus all the money on. Well, then you get your revenue up.
Yeah.
Right? Get all the...
Maybe you should run for mayor, man. You got your platform. It's already there.
I'm actually a Canadian citizen. Can I actually run if I'm not like a born American?
For mayor, I believe.
Oh yeah, you can. It's just president is like the only thing you can't do.
Yeah,
you can run for Congress, can't you? If you're not a natural born American.
Man, I don't know.
How do you not know this? You're supposed to be like.
I'm not running for Congress, man. I don't know.
Yeah, fair.
Yeah.
Okay.
Saying. I don't know. Plus, I'm an American, so like wouldn't apply.
Yeah, you don't have to worry about this.
But yeah, so I think the community is great, but I also think that like from a tech point of view, Ann Arbor punches above its weight, and it has for a while. There's obviously, like in recent history, you have LlamaSoft. I think they had $1.5 billion exit. There's 4C. There's Criteo, who got bought by, there was another. I forget. It became Criteo or Criteo. I don't know how to pronounce it.
It's a networking company.
No, they did I think Bain Capital bought this company. Anyways, and then of course Duo in recent years had a $2 billion exit. And there's like
Barracuda is another one. They were networking, right?
Yep. Rubber Networks.
Okay.
So there's like decent culture that I think the university certainly helps.
Yeah. There's actually, I haven't looked at these rankings recently, but Michigan has a top 5 engineering and a top 5 business school.
Yeah.
Which I do not believe anyone else has. there might be like, Stanford MBA is number one or however you want to like rank this stuff. But
undergrad you're talking about?
It's just the schools. Like, how do the schools rank? So I forget specifically. But again, unique situation. We have very talented technical people and very talented on the business side,
right?
Which is like rare combination. You need to be good at both of those.
Yeah, for sure. And I think there's a lot of really cool entrepreneurship stuff coming out of Michigan. Also, as a proud Spartan, I think there are other great universities in Michigan too.
Yeah.
But I think like if you look at the talent that comes out of the University of Michigan and Michigan State, like there's a lot of really amazing companies that were founded by graduates of each of those schools.
Oh yeah.
So I think as a VC, like really interesting opportunity. I know I saw you at a demo day for a University of Michigan CS.
The hackathon.
Yeah, they had a hackathon where they did like a whole presentation. Like
it actually wasn't a hackathon. It was just a demo. No one was building things there.
That day, yeah.
Yeah, that day.
I think they were leading up to it. But anyways, I think it definitely punches above its weight. I think one place that I personally have found to be challenging is there's really great kind of like out of undergrad talent from the universities. Senior level leaders though, I think that's, if you're talking about like a senior sales leader, a senior engineering leader, there's certainly more of those people in other places. But
a lot of kids leave. I noticed like I'll meet smart kids in Michigan, their freshman, sophomore year, and then they like drop out to go be like a first engineer at Ramp or Stripe or something like that. And then they don't always come back. It might be if you have a local tie,
right? Your
family's here, you might come back,
right?
I think that's the challenging part.
Totally.
There's not always like a magnet to keep people to stay, which
I mean, Duo did a great job of that. They had great connections into the engineering school and would, bring a large intern cohort in every year. And I think they kept many of those people because it looked like if there's a compelling company, that's a really cool company here, and you could intern there during the summer and you can work there during the school year, like just inertia wise, it's most convenient to just stay with that company, right? Certainly there's like, I want to live in a big city. That's one.
That's like there's a lot of people graduate school. You're like, I want to go to New York or Chicago.
And the other part of it too, I think this is true at Michigan, but maybe even more true at Michigan State is if you leave school with student debt, you kind of want to get a great job at Microsoft.
Make as much money as you can. Yeah.
Right. Totally. So there's that element of it. And I think another one is, well, if that company doesn't work out, then I can go to 10 other ones or 100 other ones, like right down the street, where my experience as an early startup employee is like valued for what it is rather than like seen as a liability. So I think like we not to say it's Ann Arbor's perfect, but I think it definitely punches above its weight because of the experience in the community. There's a lot of great founders here, and the talent coming out of the universities, I think, is great too.
How do you get the best people when you're trying to track density of talent and you're working on wisely and then pursuit? Just how do you get the best people in Ann Arbor?
I think it depends on at what level, right? If you're talking about like fresh out of undergrad, I think having a great intern program is like the answer there.
Did you guys do that at Wisely or doing it at Pursuit?
We did actually, like, I would say it was more happenstance or just dumb luck. But one of my co-founders from Wisely started as an intern, actually, and was phenomenal. Josh, shout out Josh.
Josh punching his way, the intern.
Great dude. And so, but it was just like dumb luck. I met him through like some job board thing.
Why'd you point at me when you did that? You're like some job board thing. You're like, oh, am I the job?
That's just a hand motion. Yeah, I wouldn't make anything of it. Dumb luck. Yes, dumb luck.
This Turner guy just see what.
No, but we are trying to be much more intentional about that now. And so like a few weeks ago, I did a talk at Michigan to their engineering department, and we had 68 interns apply. 68. That's like,
damn. That's one below 69.
Way more than like we can hire.
Yeah.
So like, how do you start parsing through those and, figure out when you're a young company, 10 plus people, like how do you bring on a bunch of them? But it's something that we're committed to doing as time marches on.
Interesting. Okay. So you talk a lot about this company Wisely. We've mentioned a couple of times. What's the story there? I know I've kind of heard, I've heard like a sort of long version. I think like the 15-minute version. I heard you gave it at the demo day.
Yeah.
So I want to kind of talk through because I mean, it's pretty interesting. I think it's maybe a way to describe it is like you struggled through for 4.5 years, didn't get product market fit. You kind of like hit rock bottom. And then we talked earlier, you sold it.
Yeah.
It's like pretty successful outcome at the end of the day. How did it all kind of get started?
Well, I guess like the short-ish version was out of undergrad, I was at Accenture. And when I was at Accenture, I led recruiting at Michigan and Northwestern for the undergrad strategy practice.
Were you living in Ann Arbor at the time?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
But I was on a plane every week for 5 years. But when I was through the Northwestern connection, I met one of my co-founders, Tyler, recruited him to Accenture. We worked together there for about 18 months.
Wow. And
we were in the office late one night, and our client was American Express, and we had this like what we thought was a pretty genius idea. And I was like, we should tell American Express about that. And he's like, "What's that?" It's like, let's just start that company. And I was like, like we'd always talked about wanting to start a company. Here's this idea that we finally had, and we're like, okay, let's pursue it.
Yeah,
no pun intended.
Yeah.
So, anyways, I think probably 6 months or so go by. I decided to leave in the fall of 2011. He left in the spring of 2012. Meanwhile, I had started a coding boot camp as kind of like a side project because I wanted to learn how to code. I was always the Excel guy at Accenture, but I wanted to learn how to build apps.
So you were teaching other people while you were learning?
Yeah, it was like the hair club for men. I was the president and the client.
Okay.
And, that's a different story, but I decided to kill that after a year. And then in the spring of 2012, April 5th, 2012, to be precise, I'll never forget that day, we raised $500K from my college entrepreneurship professor and his friend. Just, angel checks. And we did it on a PowerPoint deck. At the time, it was a PowerPoint deck. And literally knew negative things about how to start a company.
So what was the pitch?
The pitch was, if you remember, like back in the day, Square had this app. It was called Card Case. Do you remember this?
I don't remember.
Where like you could pay. It had your cards in this like digital card case. You could touch your phone down and pay with it. It was like early Apple Pay.
Okay.
And I was like, oh my God, that's like the most amazing thing. Mobile payments is going to be everywhere tomorrow.
Yeah.
P.S. Like a decade later, it's
finally here. Yeah.
Yeah.
I literally don't bring my wallet sometimes when I go somewhere. It's just phone.
Totally. We got to get Michigan to have the digital driver's license. I mean, come on.
Yeah. I mean,
anyone at the state listening.
Yeah. Hopefully there's some people. Yeah. I mean, hopefully people got sucked in from like all the other stuff.
Yeah.
We're going to be like, oh, public funding.
Yeah.
State, and then like we're an hour in, it's like honeypot. Get the election. We don't care about anything else.
That was our objective. So, yeah. So anyways, we were like, oh, once you touch your phone down, there should be an algorithm that picks the card that is in your financial interest. So, to maximize rewards or to, choose the card that has the lowest interest rates or whatever. We thought that was like the logical next step. Still is an interesting idea, but like there's a million reasons why a startup is a terrible place to make that happen. So we built this app. It was a terrible, we thought of it as an MVP, but it was not viable.
It was an MP, minimum
product. It arguably wasn't even a product.
It was just minimum.
Yeah, right. It was definitely minimum. And then, it's funny though. We got like written up in the Wall Street Journal.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the color
photo. That's insane.
Yeah, in the journal, and my mom was all proud and stuff. But
how did you land that? How do you get a Wall Street Journal article with like not much?
Basically, just that is a good question that I don't fully understand. I think it was like we had kind of an interesting idea.
Did you email them?
Yeah, we pitched them. Cold pitch. Yeah, and then like through some random connection that thought it was interesting, and it was like partially talking about. It wasn't the angle wasn't just our company. It was that we had like this software development thing that we had started, this boot camp that we, came out of the boot camp to like build this product. Anyways, I think we knew within 3 months or should have known within 3 days that the app was just not going to work. The friction to sign up. There's that Dave McClure thing where it has the pirate metrics, AARRR. Acquisition, activation, retention, revenue, referrals, like kind of the consumer funnel. we had no really good way to do acquisition. It was not viral. Our activation was like pathetic. 1% of people who downloaded the app actually went through the process of, taking the steps.
It was probably like the 10 people that you knew that asked
Yeah,
to do it.
exactly. Mostly, yes. Yeah. And maybe not even them. But so, we killed that thing. And I remember like going to, a meeting with the two investors and being horrified to have to break the news that this idea was not going to work. And they were like, well, we invested in you guys. Like, do you have any other ideas? And we were like, yes. And they're like, okay.
Did you go do them or did you just make that up?
Oh,
you did? Okay.
So interestingly enough, we were one of the first, if not the first, consumer app to integrate with Plaid. It was back when,
nice.
When Zach and William were like working in some shoebox apartment in New York.
They also did a consumer spending thing before Plaid. Yeah. So you both have this idea. They went to Plaid.
They are smarter than we are, I think, is the punchline there. But yes, that is exactly right.
Yeah.
Well, we kind of chased that consumer app idea that they had, similar one, right? The whole thesis of it, which I still think is interesting, was like you have Amazon recommendations based on what you buy. You have Spotify recommendations based on what you listen to, Netflix based on what you watch, but there's nothing like that for the physical world, like how you spend your money. And we were like, if you could get the transaction data from your credit card and have that plotted on a map and build a graph, like a recommendation system off of that, I think that's really cool. I still think it's really cool. P.S. If anyone's working on that, hit me up because I'd love to invest in that concept because I think it's probably easier to do today than at the time. At the time, the way it worked was you had to give us your username and password to your bank account. There was no Plaid modal that everyone had like known of. Now there's like a Plaid branded modal that gives you some, if you're technically savvy, gives you some, security that like Plaid actually holds your username and password. And this app just has like, a key to, or a token to
just accesses the whatever data Plaid has stored from there. Exactly. Web scrape.
Yeah. And so, there's like a layer of security there where you don't have to trust that startup with your credentials. You just trust Plaid. Yeah. Right. So I think that is maybe a meaningful difference, maybe not. But at the time, what we were doing was and then I think AI makes this easier too, but we built a whole crazy system to take the ugly string that you've probably seen on your credit card statements that shows where you made that purchase, and
like it'll show the address like 62 Stadium Boulevard, Verizon store 2196.
Yes, right. And that would probably be a pretty easy one.
Yeah.
It has an address, but then sometimes it has a phone number or like the part of an address, part of a name. So anyways, like we were trying to take those strings and tie them to a spot on the map and then build a recommendation system off of it. That, and I think we actually got good at like kind of mobile UI and UX at that point. Similar story to the Wall Street Journal one. We had guessed an email address for a guy at Apple, Steven, never forget this dude. But I emailed this guy, was like, hey, we're working on this cool new app. Love for you guys to feature it in the App Store. Because at that time, an App Store feature was a huge unlock. And here's, why we think the app's cool, whatever. And then he invited us to come out to Cupertino and like show him the app, play around with it. And we're like, wow, this might actually work. And then long story long, we got featured every year in the App Store, every week for a year. We got featured in the App Store and we had close to 500,000 downloads. But again, activation, it still was not viral.
It was still the 1%. Still, we had like 5,000
exactly.
registered users, roughly.
Activated users.
Okay. Yeah. And then retention was low. It was only one of those R's.
Yeah.
So it was just like, there's 1,000 people, maybe less than that, using it.
And so now we're starting, this is like maybe a year and a half in, and we're like, oh man,
How much money did you have left at this point?
We raised a little bit more money from those same two people.
Okay.
And so I think we never had much in the way of runway ever throughout the life of Wisely, but we raised some more money from those guys and then, came to the conclusion that this wasn't going to work either. And what we ended up doing was, there was a book that I remember reading. It was Steve Blank, the AOL guy. Oh. And there's a line in the book that, at least this is how I remember it. I have to fact check this, but I think there's a line in that book that says a bad day with customers is better than the best day in the office. And I was like, I've been spending a lot of days in the office. Like maybe I should go talk to people who are going to like actually monetize this thing.
Yeah.
So, if you looked at the transaction data, the most common purchases for people, the most varied purchases for people were restaurants.
So you thought you could influence the decisions that they made around.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
And we thought the people who would pay for it in some form or fashion would be the restaurant owners. So went around, started talking to all these restaurant owners. And there's one person in particular who was like, dude, the last thing I need is another app that I have to manage. I have Yelp, I have Google, I have TripAdvisor, I have Foursquare. There's name 10 other ones.
Oh, and the delivery providers weren't even around yet.
They weren't even around. So now
it really blew up his world. Yeah.
Way more to manage.
Yeah.
But he's like, the last thing I need is another app. But I would love to know when someone walks in the front door. Because like my hosts are oftentimes my most junior people who work in the restaurant. And 100% of my customers interact with them. So, it would be nice if they knew when someone walked in that Turner's been here before. And if you had a booth preference, or if it was your birthday, or if you liked a certain drink like that, they could make you feel like a regular, right?
Yeah, because I feel like when I think about our favorite restaurants, it's usually the owner that recognize you. Is like, oh, Mike, welcome back.
100%.
So good to see you. Like, we got this special. You should check it out. It's like the burger, you'll like it.
Right. But, from the restaurant owner's perspective, they're trying to build systems so that level of hospitality can happen even when they're not, it's like not dependent upon them, right?
Yep.
I think there are certain restaurants, usually in big cities, like, Danny Meyer's restaurants do a fantastic job of that.
This is the Shake Shack guy?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. He's got
a couple
ones
other
that are
ones.
full service restaurants too. But yeah, so like trying to make that hospitality experience more accessible.
It's like that one where we on the Echelon, that new one downtown. We both did date night at the same place. It was a pretty high end, pretty nice.
Yeah.
My wife's a bigger fan than I am. I don't like their food that much, but it's a good experience. My wife loves it. Yeah.
It beat my expectations.
Yeah. I have very high expectations, but it's a good one.
Yeah. So, and then, so we started walking around and then talking to all these restaurant owners. So we built the mobile payment app. We built the recommendation app. And then now this is the third app that we're building, was this loyalty app that used Bluetooth beacons and 10 other things to try to track you when you walked in the door.
Okay. And then what happened when that happened?
We had good results in Ann Arbor. I think we had like 25 restaurants in Ann Arbor and maybe 10,000 consumers using it, which is
nice. That's like 10x at least higher than before. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're like, maybe we have something here this time. If we could make this true everywhere, we're in business.
Were you in Grand Rapids at that point? Because I used it
at a couple of Grand Rapids restaurants. Yeah.
The Winchester.
Yeah.
On Wealthy. Yeah. I think that's why I first came across it. I forget which year this was.
Yeah. It's probably like maybe 15.
Yeah, 15, 16-ish.
Yeah, something around there.
Yeah, I remember seeing.
I think it was another one over there.
Yeah, we went to Donkey sometimes. Yeah, I remember we were like, oh, this is like kind of a cool idea for like an app. Like you get bonuses when you come back in, I think was like the way, like when you come back. Yeah.
And long story on that one is basically we got to a place where requiring the consumer to do something we thought was just not the path. But the problem was still like the problem of we want to make sure that our customers have a consistent hospitality experience. That was an actual problem that restaurants were willing to pay for. So we dropped all the stuff. Like after we ran out of money at the end of 15, we had $11 in our company bank account, missed payroll for 6 months in early 2016. During that time, we were trying to figure out how to save the company. So many people were like, dude, just shut down the company. What are you doing? You're working on this for...
Yeah, how many employees? Was it just
we had
Tyler and
Josh? 4 at the time. Yeah.
Okay.
And Ty and I both like kind of gave ourselves an equity haircut because we thought it was the right thing to do. Gave some of that equity to our 2 other co-founders. And
so it was like, we can't pay you, but we'll give you like a couple.
Yeah, because they're smart, talented people. Like they're going to wake up one morning and be like, wait, why don't I go work half as hard?
Make some money.
Make more money at some other company.
Wow.
Yeah. So we kept going.
How do you survive with only $11 in the bank account? Like, did you have some customers? They were like kind of...
No, we literally didn't get paid. Like, imagine going to work and then like when payday hits, you get a 0 in your bank account.
But didn't you have to like pay utilities, like pay rent? Did you...
Yeah, we did.
How did you
went on a credit card? And then my wife was at the grocery store a couple of times and like swipes the card, declined. And she's like, what happened here? And we just like got our credit cards frozen a couple of times. It was brutal.
So how did so the credit card was frozen? You had no money.
Yeah. one of our credit cards was frozen. We put it on another one.
Okay.
Dude.
And then would you eventually like be able to pay one of them down?
That was the argument. Yeah. Like, we're going to figure it out. We're going to be able to pay them down.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you talk about like having a fire lit under your ass, like that really motivated us to try to figure some stuff out.
Yeah.
And that's why we're like, let's, you know, forget all the consumer stuff. Like, I now know that I'm not cool enough to like have a consumer business. I'm like, that's just not me. And I'm also cool with that.
Yeah.
But B2B stuff was like, you could just go talk to the customers and ask them what their problems are and like solve them.
And it'll just be like a company that has $1 million in the bank. They can just send you some money if they like what you do.
Yeah, exactly. Like, how easy is that?
Was this you had this moment with a demo where you gave a demo?
Yeah.
Was this or before?
Yeah, it was like when that time.
It was during the time.
It was during that time
with the demo.
Yeah, that's a good story. It was probably like 2015-ish. P.S. My wife was going to grad school and pregnant with our first kid.
So basically, she was not making a ton of money to pay off the credit cards also, and she was super busy.
Yes. And pregnant. So we had like an insanely stressful time.
Wow.
And the demo story was, there was this thing called the Ann Arbor New Tech Meetup.
Yep, I've been to that before.
Did they still do it, by the way?
I haven't been in a while. I don't
check that out.
The emails might be hitting my spam folder. I just haven't seen it in a while.
Meetup.com is a thing anymore.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it still exists. WeWork acquired it or something.
Oh, yeah, that would.
But it might not exist. Like,
yeah, right.
See if WeWork.
Maybe they shut it down.
I bet it's still out there.
Yeah.
We should actually check after this.
Yeah.
We'll throw a link in the show notes if anyone in Ann Arbor is updating this. We'll be like, drive some traffic to the
New Tech Meetup. It was kind of cool. But anyway, so, you know, they had a startup or 3 come in every month and present. So I was doing that for Wisely at the time, plugged my phone in, phone starts projecting on the screen behind me.
Yep.
And, you know, I was introducing myself. I'm Mike. I'm from Wisely. I had forgotten, like a moron, to turn off my notifications.
Yep.
So as I'm in, 30 seconds into this spiel, text comes down from my wife, Jen, and it says, "Are you coming with me to therapy tonight?" And like, there were probably a couple hundred people in the audience.
Yeah. And it's like a big lecture hall usually, right?
Yeah. It was at the law school, like a big lecture hall. And you could hear like half of the audience gasp, like, and then the other half was like, laughing, cracking up. And I'm like, well, I didn't say anything anywhere close to funny. Like, so I turned around, looked at the screen, and before I saw the message go, boop, animate away, I read that and I was like, oh boy, and
how do you recover from that?
I forget what exactly I said, but I said something along the lines of, starting a company, at least in our experience, has been really hard.
Yeah.
And it's not just hard for us, it's hard on our families. And, like in any company, I think if you have a relationship where you're lucky enough to be able to be like direct and honest with your partner, like that, those are the ones that actually have a chance to solve the problem. So I think, my hope is that we'll be better for it. And like, the audience was clapping or whatever, but it was funny because like, you talk about like the founder bullshit of like, how big is your team? And like, there's always this, like, maybe it was in my boogeyman in my own mind, but I feel like a lot of founders have this, is like, you want to sound like you're crushing it, right? But in reality, you're like getting your teeth kicked in every day.
Yeah.
But walking off that stage, like I was like giddy, and it was weird.
So like,
it was like,
there was like a material moment that changed how you thought about things?
Yeah, absolutely. Because it kind of removed the whole like veneer of like me having to fake, like,
you were fully exposed of like,
totally,
this is not going as good as people might think.
Dude sucks, like things that, and by the way, like that was probably before we ran out of money. So that hindsight,
really? Okay.
Shortly before we ran out of money. Like in hindsight, it was that year was super difficult, but in hindsight is one of the things I'm most grateful for out of the entire journey. And I think that's true of like the hardest challenges professionally in my life. Like I'm most grateful for those because it forced me to learn. Like there was a major software upgrade that happened in my brain. And, it went from, my perception was that the founder had to be right. The customers, the team, the investors were all counting on the founder to be right. And you have these like proverbial, like startup leaders, the gods, like Steve Jobs and Larry Page and Sergey Brin and all these guys that like, of course they were right, like.
Yeah.
So
you just think like Steve Jobs like woke up and like created the iPhone and the iPad and the App Store, and like he just like guided it all to market. Yeah. He had it all.
I had all the answers right.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, the dude was really, really good. So he's probably, more right than I was. But I went through this bit flip in my mind where I went from like, now what I say is, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but you work at a company where the CEO is wrong all the time. And I want to be less wrong. So never do something because your manager or even the CEO said to do it. Only do it if you think it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And if you don't think it's the right thing to do, loyalty means like having the courage to disagree and say what you really think. Because then one of two things happens. Either you save the company from making a bad decision, and that's like a thing that you should be lauded and promoted for.
Doing that all the time.
Yeah, right. But that actually, it's not welcome in a lot of companies, right? That had a leader who's thinking the way that I used to.
Because you would You're the CEO, you know the answer.
Yeah.
People are counting on you to have strength of always being smart and knowing everything.
Totally. Right. And then, but on the other side, so either you save the company from making a bad decision, or the employee gets a software upgrade in their mind where they now know, they now believe something that flipped a bit in their mind. And every decision that they make moving forward is now better.
Because they're informed of the way that the company actually works, or that other like system works, or like a customer thing.
So it's like the biggest win-win ever,
So you encourage disagreement.
Absolutely. All day, every day.
So when I hear somebody say, we like disagree, I think of yelling and arguing and berating people. Like, how do you avoid it descending into that and have like a good, healthy disagreement?
There's two things that come to mind that are like, because I spent years trying to answer that question. There's a phenomenal blog post by Paul Graham. It's /disagree on his blog.
Isn't it How to Disagree?
I think that's the title. The URL is /disagree, but the title is How to Disagree. I think
we'll throw a link in the description.
Phenomenal blog post, but basically he's got like this pyramid, which I actually have on coffee mugs now. But it's this pyramid of disagreement. At the very bottom is like name calling, and at the and then another one is like you go one layer up from that, and it's like the person's authority doesn't really give them the credibility to be able to say what they're saying. So for instance, like you could never, this is something like,
you're just a VC or a podcaster. You'd never
what do you know. You've never run a company. How could you know, right? Or you're not a teacher. How could you know anything about public education? Or you're not a whatever, right? So, at the very tippy top of the pyramid, the thing to aspire to is disagreeing with the central thesis. And I think like someone that I respect that I think does this really well is Jon Stewart, because he'll say like, so are you saying, and then he'll fill in the blank, right? With like a one sentence thing that person who believes it can say, yes, that is exactly what I think. And you don't try to like, make it sound like a moron thinks it. Like you try to objectively state it the way that they would in one sentence. And I think unless you, as the person who disagrees with someone else, unless you can actually say like, so are you saying one sentence, like, and have the other person say, yes, that's exactly right, then you have no chance of solving the problem. But it's true both ways. So I remember a couple of times where I've tried to, we were in like some disagreement trying to figure it out. And I've said, I want to make sure that I really understand what you're saying. Are you saying one sentence? And the other person says, yes. Awesome. Can you summarize what you think I'm saying? And see what they can.
Hopefully they can.
And if they can't, like no use talking about any solutions, right? You just need to make sure that the framing of the problem is nailed down first. So I think that's like a really key point. And, credit to Paul Graham for helping me, think through that one. Yeah. The other one is kind of back to Charlie, and this kind of intersects with that same thing, but back to Charlie Munger, where if you don't know the other person's argument better than they do, then you haven't done the work required to have an opinion.
Yeah.
So I try hard to like actually have fewer opinions on things. Like if I don't know, it's like, I don't really have an opinion on this. I haven't done the work to really think it through. So let's talk about it. Right. So I think those are kind of the two big things in my mind.
So how do you have when you're in that information gathering phase of coming up with an opinion, how do you approach that when you're in a setting like with your team of like not offending or not dismissing, being open to hearing people's views when you're just like, you're trying to get everyone to the same level of like understanding the problem and then like, let's decide how we're going to solve this.
I have a couple of thoughts on that. One, I think, is like, what does it look like to do that well?
Yeah.
Like, how do you observe that?
Yeah, that's a great way to tee up that question.
Right? Like, I think that a healthy culture is one where a new engineer can question the head of sales in an all-company meeting without, and like be celebrated for it, right? Someone who's in another part of the organization questioning someone over here.
You have lower part of the ladder
To higher part of the ladder in a different org. Like if and vice versa. Like if a new sales rep can question the head of product or the head of engineering or the CEO, like that's the mark of goodness. So, you know, for that reason, like if we're on a Zoom, I ask folks, like, don't be on mute. Like, please take yourself off mute because that just puts another barrier between you and speaking up. I want to hear you sneeze, like literally. Like, I don't want to have that be the reason why you don't remove all barriers to talking.
Yep.
And then try to, you know, and it's a bit of a gut feel thing, but like, how much are people actually cool disagreeing openly? And then I think the other part of it is when people join the company, they likely come from places where that is not true, where the expectation is like kind of put your head down and do what you're told.
Yep.
So we look for evidence in the hiring process. This is one of our values, right? Run at conflict. We look for people who've run at conflict before. Critical thinking is another one of them. You know, show me a time where you disagree, like talk to me about a time where you disagree with someone in a position of authority. What's the last thing you changed your mind on, right? So we build into our interview process, and we have a written thing that we have people do where we ask them questions and hear their stories. And you'd be surprised, like you can tell when someone writes out their answers to these questions. We find that to be a pretty good filter.
What's a bad answer to some of those?
I mean, they're just generally less specific. You know, like there was one person, for instance, that embodied. It comes to mind, like someone wrote in their response recently, and this is a good answer.
Okay.
That they actively, I was going to say lobbied, but not in a lobbying sense, but they actually like advocated, a better word, for Medicaid to cover continuous glucose monitors for people. Because that previously in Michigan wasn't done. Like, it wasn't part of the Medicaid reimbursement. And this person was like, it should be. Like, and they actively went out of their way to do it, you know, to like get that covered. Which I was like, oh my gosh, that one example, like, lives 3 of our values right in it. And she walked through how exactly she did that. And so I love that example. Other ones are, you know, on the school project, I disagreed with my teammate on some other thing. So like, how important was it? How much did they go out of their way to do it? Like, you know, those are I think good examples of it. But then like, I don't know, like in my, I think I have a bit of a reputation in my wife's family for being like the one who will be like honest, you know, and people actually like, because of that, I can probably say stuff that if someone else said it, they'd be like, what, are you mad at me? You know? So there's a bit of a cultural part of it where you just have to live it and it becomes just normal, right? Like we try to normalize having hard conversations. Like people can make certain hard conversations hard. How much should we, you know, pay this person? Should they get a raise? Those are the sort of questions where like, let's just talk about it. We don't have to make this a hard thing. Actually, we can choose to make it easy.
Yeah.
And I think it's just that choice is important.
I realized we got a little sidetrack going on though, the YZ story. We were just talking like you're basically rock bottom where we were just at. $11 in the bank account. What was kind of the turning point where things finally started to look good?
Yeah. Well, I think we had started to embrace this whole like, you know, bad day with customers is better than the best day in the office thing.
Yep.
And so for me, the turning point was we sent out basically a spam email to a bunch of restaurant owners where we were not selling our product because we basically didn't have one, but we were selling a problem. We were selling the existence of a problem. So like, it's important to know who your guests are, but no one knows, right? And that's what the email was all about. Like, basically, are you happy with the way your restaurant brand is solving that problem? Because no one can be, right?
Yeah.
And we were like, let's just see who's got this issue. And then let's talk to them and figure out what they believe the best solutions are. And we'll think about those and try to come up with a product that we think solves it. So one of our first customers was actually our first customer in this new world was Bar Taco. Great restaurant brand from Connecticut at the time. And I'll never forget, like, the person that we talked to there, his name was Scott. He was the president of Bar Taco.
Okay.
And he was like, hey, I hate this idea of a loyalty app. Like, I would literally never do a loyalty app. It discounts my brand. It makes people think we're cheap. That's not what we're about. However, I love the idea of knowing when my regulars come in the door. And they were fortunate that it was like a taco restaurant. They were always insanely busy.
Yep.
He's like, we have lines out the door, Thursday through Sunday every week. And I want to know who those people are who are coming back, right? And the waitlist system that they used at the time had no concept of a CRM in it, right?
It was just a wait list.
Just a wait list. They text you when you got on the list, and that was it. But it didn't say the Turner's been here 5 times. Didn't say anything about who you were, what you like to eat or drink. So he was like, can you take that CRM idea and wrap a wait list around it? And we were like, well, we can go out of business. We could just do that. So yeah, let's do it.
Okay.
So this is in probably May of 2016.
Yep.
We had them sign a letter of intent that basically pre-negotiated price, pre-negotiated all the things, right? And we got it to a place where, like, if we build this, you will pay us $200 per restaurant per month. All the things were pre-negotiated. And they would be like in a contract if we delivered. And here's exactly what delivering meant. There were 5 things that the app had to do. Had to be able to text someone. There had to be a list that you could see. Had to show how many visits they had, right? So we defined those things that they really cared about, and then we just, and by we I mean mostly Josh, just worked his ass off that whole summer with our designer to like come up with the V1, and we shipped it on Labor Day weekend, which was like a really busy weekend for them. One of the assumptions that we made unknowingly was that we were counting on their Wi-Fi to be good. So we rolled it out because Wi-Fi in our office was great. Wi-Fi in the restaurant, when you're walking around with an iPad, is terrible. And so, like, the syncing of the wait list was a nightmare.
So you launched.
We launched
Labor Day weekend.
Yeah, and I thought that they might have like killed us because it didn't go well. Like, the wait list did not sync. They would person over here with one of the iPads would add Turner, and Turner wouldn't show up here for 5 minutes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, on the other iPad.
So this was like their flagship location, right?
It was, yeah. It was like a $12 million a year restaurant.
Okay.
Crazy busy restaurant. So, then we, finally figured that out, and now that's a solved problem. And the next thing was we want to tie into their point of sale.
Yeah.
And this was another thing where, again, it's a $12 million a year restaurant, and their tacos were like $4 a taco, or $3.50 a taco. So they're selling a lot of tacos.
Yeah.
But we took down their point of sale because we did a point of sale integration because we wanted to know what tacos Turner ordered once he was seated on table 53. We wanted to know what his order was and store that in our CRM. So our agent brought down they had to break out on a busy Friday night, the knuckle buster thing where you're like, shh, you put the credit card. Have you seen one of these in the last 20 years? You like put the credit card in. They had like the copy paper where you used to like knuckle. It was this thing that would like, based on the numbers on the card that were embossed, it would stick out. You swipe, you go like, and it would actually imprint the numbers and the name on the card onto this little check.
That then they would run later?
They would run later.
Okay.
Yeah, it was so brutal. Like,
were you there in the restaurant?
I was not there that day in the restaurant.
Did you guys have someone on the team?
For a lot of the early days, yeah, but not at that particular night.
Oh, man.
And I just remember, like, their CEO is a huge lesson for me. He called me insanely calmly. Like, if it was me, I would have been freaked out. Like, what is going on? But, he just called me insanely calmly and he was like, your app has brought down the point of sale in our restaurant, and we're not able to process any payments right now except for these, knuckle buster things. And we need to get that solved. And I'm like, yeah, we really need to get that solved.
Yeah.
But that was a lesson in just like being totally calm under fire. And that's something I've like tried to channel from time to time. I was really impressed by that.
So what, did you solve it?
Yeah, we solved it. And that became a non-issue. Actually, I don't think that ever happened again. Well, actually not true. I take that back. It was in January where that happened. Because it was like one weekend in January, we brought down their point of sale. And I remember they used this ancient point of sale called Micros. I was on the phone at like 1:30 in the morning with like the tier 3 Micros support trying to troubleshoot this thing on a Saturday morning at 1:30 a.m. And we got it figured out. They had to, by the way, the point of sale was so broken that they had to like bring in these point of sales ran on like a Dell tower, like a desktop tower.
Like just sitting there behind the counter?
Yeah. They had to bring in an entire new one in.
You just like bricked the
thing so badly. So we're like, cool. We brought the new one in, got it set up for the next weekend, and we did the same thing again the next following weekend.
Oh wow!
So it was brutal, man. And then once we got through that second weekend, we're like, we need to get one of these towers of our own so we can brick our own tower in our own office, not theirs. Which that was really hard to do because you had to have some crazy enterprise license. But we ended up doing it on a virtual machine. But anyways, like that became a solved problem. And except for that one restaurant, 2 weekends in a row, we never brought down another point of sale that I'm aware of.
So then at that point, was that when you were like, okay, we're not like killing our customers' business anymore, but this is kind of working.
Yeah. The fact that they didn't fire us after that, we were kind of like, we should be fired right now. But we're not, so like there's something going there, you know?
So is that when you kind of knew that like there's something here and it's kind of starting to work?
That was tough, man, because now keep in mind, we had built 1, 2, 3, that was our fourth major pivot. Or I guess third major pivot, fourth major idea.
Yep.
And I think, gun shy about product market fit. I'm like, no, like we couldn't possibly have product market fit. So
because you spent like 5 years just getting
nothing, trying, failing. And I think I credit one of my later investors / later board members, Andy, for saying like, you guys have product market fit, man, like go, you know? And that was, I think we were probably north of $1.5 million ARR at that point before I kind of like accepted the idea that we might have product market fit. Maybe even more than that. Might have been more than 2 million of ARR. So anyways, I think that's one of the gifts for being a second time founder is like you have spidey sense on a lot of these things. You know what real pain sounds like. You know what fake pain sounds like too.
Yeah. And then how did you go about scaling? I know you guys got quite a bit bigger than 2 million ARR. Like what was just generally like the process of getting there? Yeah,
we ended up selling the company around 10 of ARR and we never raised institutional money. So we were, I think we probably during that phase burned 2.5 million total, maybe 3. So, 4-to-1, 3-to-1 kind of like ARR to burn ratio, just solid.
They'd write blog posts about that. The VCs would.
Yeah, right. But like there was some unlocks in there too. I think like one of the things that sticks out at me is hiring a phenomenal leadership team and like giving them the hats to wear. I think that's a key part of it. The other thing too, there was a great David Sachs blog post called the Cadence or How to Operate a SaaS Company. Did you ever read this one?
Probably.
It was basically like, everything runs on a quarterly schedule, which we did that. But at a lot of companies, sales and finance are on the same calendar. It's a fiscal quarter that product and marketing are. And he's like, no, like offset those things by 45 days. So you have sales and finance work off of like the fiscal calendar, and you have product and marketing work off of a seasonal release schedule that is also 3 months.
So you're releasing November 15th, February 15th,
May 15th, and August 15th. Yeah,
okay.
Exactly. And, it's winter, spring, summer, fall.
I was going to say that kind of lines up more with the season start, not the quarter start. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So we have seasonal releases. We did it at Wisely. We do it at Pursuit. And I think like there's a bunch of reasons why it's helpful. And the blog post I'd recommend if you're a founder and you haven't read it, and especially if you're thinking like, I need to hire a COO or a chief of staff or someone to help me spin all these plates, like go read the Cadence blog post first.
We'll throw a link in the show notes for people.
Yeah, and it's great because like I think there's a few reasons. One is that at the end of a quarter, it creates the space for the CEO and for all the other leaders to be like really, really dialed in on making the quarterly number, right? Deal support, like deal desk, joining calls, like doing what it takes to hit the number. And then you have 45 days where everyone on the executive team is focused on product. So the sales team, it's obvious that product and engineering should be focused on shipping product and engineering, but like to have marketing and sales be able to carve out the time to go think about like, what are customers saying? Like, what is the feedback we're getting actually?
That we lost this deal or they didn't sign because we need this feature.
Exactly. So it creates this connectivity between the functions that I think is really important. And then it also just drives a lot of clarity in there. Like one of the things that they cover in the blog post, or that Sachs covers in the blog post, is the concept of like big rocks, pebbles, and sand, which like, this is actually true. If you were to take two jars, same amount of sand, same amount of pebbles, same amount of big rocks, like, bigger rocks, and you put the sand in first, and then the pebbles and the rocks are sticking out the top of the jar. They don't fit. But if you put the big rocks in first, and then you put the pebbles in, and then you put the sand in and shake it up a bunch, the sand like fills in around it. So you actually can better utilize, there's less wasted space in the jar. And I think the same is true for engineering. I think a lot of engineering and product teams can get bogged down in like the proverbial sand. It's like bugs or little issues that customers bring up that are not like, they're important. I don't want to minimize them, but they're not like critical things, right? They're not the things that the customers actually value, And so that's always like that was a huge unlock for us. It was figuring that out. And I think the third thing I would say is just talent density. That's something that we're trying to do at Pursuit. And, I question it all the time. I'm like, should we have hired XYZ person? Like they could be good. They could have gotten a bunch of stuff done, but we're just try to hold a high talent bar. And I think that means that you have to be comfortable going slower on hiring. So,
and then you did end up selling the company. I know you kind of the process of doing that. Like, how did you get that done?
Yeah, we had in the kind of like Q1, Q2 part of 2021. We got hit up by a bunch of strategics. I think it was like 9 different strategic companies.
Because you probably crossed that threshold of like size where they're like, we would want to tuck this in. We'd want to bring in the product by the cash flow that you're generating.
Yeah. Well, I don't know about the cash flow because it wasn't positive at the time, but like it was definitely by the growth.
Yeah. By the, yeah.
And so there were, whether it was a payments company or other reservations and waitlist companies or partners of ours, we had 9 people who had expressed some level of interest in purchasing the company. That was in like Q1, Q2 of 2021. And remember, like, we started the company officially on April 5th of 2012. So we were 9 years in at that point. Our early investors were 9 years in at that point. And we had just, if you look at 9 months prior to that, we'd just seen COVID, which cratered our business, dude. Like for a solid month, we went from, $350 or $400K of revenue coming in the door every month to 0 overnight. Like, and so it was a very compelling reminder that it could all go away overnight. And like every 99.9% of my net worth was in the company. Same with my co-founder. So that was like a thought in the back of our mind.
Yeah.
And so we were like, we're going to need to do something this year. We're going to need to raise or sell the company. So like, let's just see what all the options are. Some of those companies, on the acquiring side, like got ahead of the others in kind of just how quickly they were moving. And so we kind of had to pump the brakes on that because we also hadn't started the VC thing at all. But we kind of pumped the brakes in like July of 21 on the strategic acquisition side. And, legitimately we were like, we've got a couple of big deals we need to go close, which we did. And And then in that time, we also like kicked off a fundraising thing and got 5 different term sheets. Because again, like we wanted to see all the cards and make what we felt was the best decision. And we didn't feel like we could do that unless we had all the cards turned over, both on the fundraise side and on the acquisition side. So we get to August, end of August, we had like 5 different term sheets from strategic, like from VCs. And you know, one of them was phenomenal. And they were like, hey, you know, we'll modify the term sheet in such a way that allows you to consider 2 strategic acquisitions. But if you go with a financial investor, you'll go with us. And I was like, wow, that's incredible. So we had like a couple of week period there at the end of August and, you know, first 10 or so days of September where we had this signed term sheet that we could shop with 2 named strategics. So we named two strategics. Ola was one. There was another one. That was a public company. And, you know, we were like sprinting to try to get, you know, an LOI signed and, you know, got there, you know, there was a bunch of back and forth, which, you know, I think that helped from a price perspective. There was a bunch of back and forth because there were so many interested parties that helped us, you know, negotiate better terms and stuff. Mm-hmm. But we wanted to sell to Ola because they were a partner of ours for years. They had been, you know, like a phenomenal partner. They had the same business model that we did as well, right? They made their money by making restaurants happy. And we really cared about our customers and the product. And we felt like there were examples of B2B companies who had sold to like a company that had a different business model, whether it was a credit card company or an advertising company. The business model wins in the end, right? And so we felt best about like we wanted to stay true to this whole like the restaurant should own the data thing.
Yep.
And the best way to ensure that was true was to sell to someone whose business model was the same as ours. They made money by making restaurants happy. And Ola was a phenomenal fit on a number of those dimensions, including that.
I want to apologize that we lost the last 2 minutes of the conversation with Mike. But to be honest, you didn't miss much. It was basically just a wind down of the conversation in a way that would have avoided me having to include this part. So with that said, thank you for listening. If you missed it, make sure to check out last week's 0 to 1 Startup Growth Playbook with Sam Ross at Numeral. If you don't want to miss a future episode, subscribe to my newsletter, The Split, to get each episode plus a transcript emailed directly to your inbox every week. Thanks again for listening. See you in the next episode.